Those Memories Aren't Mine. An original audiobook by Mindshift Library. Nadia Vance, 36, cataloged other people's lives for a living. She worked in the archives of the Hollies Museum, in the climate-controlled basement where donated photographs went to be identified, dated, and forgotten by everyone except her. She had a technician's eye for the past. She could tell a 1962 Kodak print from a 1964 one by the faint yellowing at the border, and she could read a stranger's handwriting like a weather report. People brought boxes of dead relatives to her desk and left lighter. Nadia never felt lighter. She felt like a librarian of other people's grief, and she had made peace with that. She was, by temperament, a person who trusted objects over people. Objects were honest about what they were. A photograph did not lie about its date. A letter did not pretend to be something it was not. People, in her experience, did both constantly. She had learned this early, from a childhood spent in a house where the most important things were the ones never said, and she had built a life around things that could be labeled. The first memory arrived on a Tuesday, in the break room, triggered by nothing she could name. She was reaching for the coffee when a smell rose around her, not coffee, something else. Citrus and dust and old paper. And with it, a street. Cobblestones, wet from rain, a narrow building with green shutters, a brass number she could see clearly, 14. And a feeling, sudden and certain, that she had stood on that street in the late afternoon, watching a ferry move across water the color of pewter. Nadia blinked. The break room was unchanged. The coffee maker gurgled. Her coworker Theo was arguing with the printer. There was no street. There was no water. She had never been to a city with ferries. She had barely left the state. She told herself it was a dream leaking into the day. She had been tired. The archives were understaffed. She had been working late. The mind did that. Everyone knew the mind did that. But the street came back that night, and the smell with it, and this time she heard a voice, a man's voice, warm, calling a name that was not hers. "Eloise," the voice said, "come look at the light." Nadia sat up in bed. She was alone in her apartment, as she usually was. The voice had not been in the room. It had been in her head, the way a song you can't stop hearing is in your head. But it had not been her song. Eloise, she did not know anyone named Eloise. She wrote it down. She was an archivist. She wrote things down. On a yellow sticky note she wrote, "Street, green shutters, 14, ferry, pewter water, citrus plus dust, voice calls Eloise." She stuck it to the edge of her mirror, where she stuck everything she meant to forget and never did. She did not yet know that the note was the first entry in a catalog of a life that was not hers. The memories accumulated like sediment. A perfume, lily and something metallic, the kind you smell on a stranger in an elevator and then cannot place for years. Nadia wore no perfume. She was allergic to most of it. But the scent arrived with the memory of a woman herself, she supposed, though the face in the memory was not her face, standing in a bathroom with white tiles, applying the scent to her wrists before a mirror, smiling at her reflection with a confidence Nadia had never owned. A song, a few bars of piano, a melody she knew the way you know your own phone number, though she had never learned it. She found herself humming it at her desk. Theo asked what it was. She said she didn't know. He hummed it back, frowning. "Sounds like something from a film," he said. "Old, French maybe." Nadia had never been to France. The accumulation unnerved her less than the texture of it. These were not vague impressions. They were specific. The perfume had a top note and a dry down. The apartment had a particular quality of afternoon light that turned dust gold. The man's voice had a slight rasp, the way a person sounds when they speak quietly to someone they love. Nadia, who prided herself on precision, could not dismiss these as the fuzzy products of an overactive imagination. They were too well resolved. They arrived, she thought with a shiver, the way a memory arrives, fully formed, emotionally loaded, uncontested by doubt. Which was the problem. A real memory is contested by doubt. Only a true one feels this certain. And this one could not be true. A room, an apartment with tall windows and a sagging bookshelf, and a plant dying in the corner. She remembered the exact warp of the floorboard near the door, the one that creaked. She remembered the quality of the light at 4 in the afternoon, slanting through those windows in a way that turned the dust gold. She had never lived in such a room. Her own apartment had fluorescent light and a landlord who answered emails in 3 weeks. And the man's voice returning, Eloise, always Eloise, Whoever Alois was, she was loved by that voice. Nadia, who had not been called anything tender in longer than she cared to count, felt a confusing ache that was not entirely her own. She did what a rational person does. She looked for explanations. The first was exhaustion. She was working too much, the archives had lost 2 staff to budget cuts, and she had absorbed their workload. Sleep debt produced hypnagogic intrusions, fragments of image and sound that felt real. She had read about this. It was common. It was boring. It was almost certainly what this was. But she noticed a pattern even in the denial. The intrusions were not random. They clustered around sensory cues, the citrusan dust smell of the paper storage, the specific weight of a certain type of photograph in her hands, a phrase her coworker used that echoed somehow, a voice she had not heard. A rational mind, she told herself, would log the conditions. So she did. She was an archivist. Logging was the one thing she trusted. On a yellow sticky note, she wrote the first entry of what would become a long and unwilling catalog. Trigger, smell, citrus, dust. Content, street, green shutters, 14 fairy pewter water. Source, unknown, emotional weight, high. She stuck it to the edge of her mirror, where she kept everything she meant to forget and never did. The second explanation was memory contamination. As an archivist, she handled donated photographs daily, thousands of them, strangers' faces, strangers' kitchens, strangers' weddings. It was plausible, even likely, that some image had lodged in her visual memory and resurfaced as a false memory, dressed up by her dreaming mind into a narrative. The brain was a careless archivist. It misfiled things. She had seen it happen to other people's collections. Why not to her own mind? The third, she did not like the third, but she listed it anyway on a fresh sticky note, was that something was wrong with her. Not tired, not contaminated. Wrong. The kind of wrong that gets a name from a doctor and a bottle from a pharmacy. The kind of wrong her mother had, quietly in the years before she died, and never named. Nadia had lost her mother to a long, unsentimental illness that had begun with small confusions, misplacing words, mistaking the neighbor for an aunt, and ended with her not knowing Nadia's name. Nadia had promised herself she would notice if it started in her. She was noticing. She did not like what she noticed. She scheduled nothing. She was not ready to be a patient. She was, however, ready to be an investigator. Investigation was her profession. She would catalog the memories the way she cataloged everything: date, trigger, content, source if found. She would treat her own mind as a donated box of unknown provenance. That was how she survived the first month. She made lists, she did not tell anyone, and the memories, denied an audience, grew louder. The photograph changed everything, because it was not in her head. It arrived in a donation box in late March, the estate of a man named Pollard, a collector who had died without heirs, his apartment cleared by a firm that shipped the contents to the museum in 40 cardboard boxes. Nadia drew box 19. Inside, among receipts and postcards, was a small envelope marked in fading ink, for the one who looks. The photograph was black and white, maybe 1950s, maybe earlier. It showed a young woman standing at a waterfront, a curved bay, domed buildings behind her, a sky the gray of an old television. The woman wore a coat with a fur collar and held a camera to her chest. Her face was turned 3/4 from the lens, so Nadia could not see it clearly, but something about the set of the shoulders, the tilt of the head, struck her with the force of a recalled name. She knew this woman. She knew the water behind her. She knew, with a certainty that had no business existing, that the building with the green dome on the left was a library, and that if you climbed its steps, there was a cafe on the second floor that served a particular almond cake. None of this was possible. Nadia had never seen the photograph before she pulled it from the envelope. She had never been to the city in the picture, she did not even know what city it was. And yet the knowledge arrived whole, like a memory, not like a deduction. She turned the photograph over. On the back, in the same fading ink, E at the bay, the last spring. E. Alois. Nadia sat down. The break room chair had a wobble, she felt it distinctly, the real world insisting on its small physical truths. Alois was real, or had been. The woman in the memory, the woman the voice called Alois, was a person who had stood at that bay, in that coat, and someone had loved her enough to write *the last spring and mean it as a sentence with an ending. For a moment she let herself imagine the photographer. Someone had stood behind the camera, Tomas, perhaps, or a friend, and pressed the shutter and handed Alois the print, and Alois had written on the back and kept it, and it had traveled through a flood and a donation and 60 years to land in Nadia's hands on a Tuesday in March. A whole life, reduced to one surviving photograph and a sentence with an ending. Nadia, who spent her days on exactly this kind of reduction, felt the weight of it more than most would. Every artifact on her desk was someone's last sentence. For the first time, Nadia did not reach for an explanation. She reached for a magnifying loupe, the kind she used on donated prints, and she looked at the photograph the way she would look at any artifact. For provenance, for the story it refused to tell outright. The bay in the photograph was the same bay in her memory. Not similar. The same curve of shoreline, the same green dome, the same quality of northern light. She had been remembering a real place. She had been remembering a real woman, and she had never been there and she had never met her. "Those memories aren't mine," she said aloud, to the empty archive. The words sounded like a diagnosis and like a plea. She put the photograph in a sleeve and logged it as *unknown sitter, see 1950s, donor Pollard estate. She did not log what she felt. Archivists did not log feelings. But she kept the sleeve on her desk where she could see it, and she began, against every professional instinct, to look for Alois. Nadia was a scientist of sorts, not a laboratory scientist but an evidentiary one. She believed in provenance. So she began to track the memories with the rigor she gave to donated objects, and she found they obeyed rules. They arrived through triggers, not randomly. The street with the green shutters came when she smelled citrus and dust, which, she realized, was the smell of the archive's old paper storage, where she spent her afternoons. The perfume arrived when she opened a particular donation box that smelled of cedar and lily. The song came when Theo played an old French film score in the break room, a melody she then recognized, though she had never heard it consciously. The apartment with the warped floorboard came when she touched a certain type of worn wood, a donation of antique furniture, a table with exactly that creak. The memories were associative, they were filed under senses. A smell, a sound, a texture opened the drawer. This was, she noted, exactly how real memory worked. Memory was not a recording, it was a scent-triggered reconstruction, which meant these false memories, if that's what they were, had been built the same way real ones were, by linking a present stimulus to a stored impression. The question was where the stored impression had come from. She also found that the memories were incomplete and sometimes wrong. She remembered the apartment's kitchen as blue, then later remembered it as green, and caught herself in the contradiction. She remembered the man's voice saying *Alois, come look at the light, but on a later occurrence he said Alois, don't go to the window, and the two could not both be true. Her memory of the other life was as unreliable as her memory of her own. That was the detail that convinced her, more than anything, that what she was experiencing was memory and not invention. Invention is consistent. Memory contradicts itself. She wrote this in a private notebook, the one she kept at home, not the museum's logs. The notebook was black, cloth-covered, the kind she bought in bulk for work and had started using for herself. On its first page she wrote the date and beneath it a single line in her careful hand, case file me. Subject reports memories of a life not lived. Hypothesis pending. It was a joke mostly. But it was also the only way she knew to survive what was happening, to make it an object she could study instead of a thing that was happening to her. Archivists, she had learned, coped by cataloging. If she could file the intrusion, she could stop being afraid of it. She added entries daily. Trigger, cedar plus lily donation box B22. Content, perfume on wrists, white bathroom tiles, a confidence I do not possess. Note, the confidence is the strangest part, it is not mine. Trigger, Theo's film score. Content, piano melody, 3 bars known completely. Source unknown. Hummed it at desk. Theo recognized it as Old French. I have never been to France. Each entry made the thing realer and paradoxically safer. A logged fear is a managed fear. The memories follow rules. They are triggered by senses. They are inconsistent. They feel real because they are real memories of something. The question is whose and how they got into me. She did not write the darker possibility, that they were hers and that her own past was the thing she had misunderstood. The city in the photograph nagged at her like a word on the tip of the tongue. She took the scan of the Pollard photograph to a colleague in the museum's geography department, a man named Victor who could identify any European waterfront from the shape of its domes. He looked at it for a long moment. "Race-marked," he said. "A bay city in the north. Small, not a capital. You've got the library dome there, that green one? Yes, that's Racemark's old public library, built 1902, converted to apartments in the 90s. The cafe on the second floor closed in '08. Almond cake was famous. Tourists still ask for it." Nadia's skin went cold. He had just described, casually, the things she had remembered: the library, the green dome, the second-floor cafe, the almond cake. Victor had learned these from books and the internet. Nadia had learned them from a memory she should not have. "Have you been?" she asked, careful. "Race-marked, once, conference 10 years ago," he looked at her. "Why, thinking of going?" "I don't travel," she said. It was true. She had not left the country. She had not left the region except for her mother's funeral in a city 3 hours north. She went home and looked up Race-marked. The images matched her memories with a precision that made her nauseous. The curved bay, the green-domed library, the narrow building with the green shutters, number 14, on a street called Cade, which, she learned, had indeed been a residential block of small apartments. The photographs, at the bay, had been taken from the steps of that library. She fell down the research rabbit hole the way only an archivist can, pulling maps from the 1950s, Street View archives, a local history blog maintained by a retired cartographer. The more she looked, the more her memories and the record agreed. The bakery on Cade with the striped awning, there. The fountain in the square where the children fed the pigeons, there. The particular curve of the seawall where the evening light turned the water the color of pewter, there, in a 1957 postcard scanned by a museum in another country. Each confirmation landed like a stone in her chest. She was not imagining a city. She was remembering one. The only question left was whether the memory was hers to have. She had been remembering a real city she had never visited. Every street, every dome, every cafe. The detail density was impossible to fake. You cannot accidentally imagine a city correctly. Either she had seen Race-marked, or someone who had seen it had put the seeing into her. She ruled out the obvious. She had not seen it. She had receipts. She had a passport with one stamp from the funeral trip, nowhere near Europe. She had no hidden travel, no gaps in her calendar large enough to hold a life in another country. The last time she had left the region was the 3-hour drive north for her mother's funeral, and she remembered that trip in gray, unpoetic detail. The rental car, the rain, her brother's silence in the passenger seat. So someone had given her Race-marked. Not recently, the memories felt old, worn, like things she had known for years without knowing she knew. Which meant the implantation, if that's what it was, had happened long ago. In childhood, perhaps, which brought her, reluctantly, to her family. Nadia's family was small and quiet, and good at silence. Her mother, Edna, had died 3 years before after the long confusion. Her father, Raymond, lived in a retirement community 2 towns over, still sharp, still distant, still the man who had taught her to label things and feel nothing about them. Her brother, Cole, was an accountant in another state, kind and uninterested, who called on holidays and meant it less than he pretended. She had grown up in a house where questions about the past were met with pleasant deflection. That was a long time ago. Why dig it up? We're fine now. Her parents had been private to the point of secrecy. She had assumed it was the reserve of their generation. Now she wondered if it was something else. She visited Raymond. They sat in the community's bland visiting room with its smell of institutional coffee, and she steered the conversation, as casually as she could, toward her early childhood. "I was looking at old photos," she said. "From before I started school. Do we have any from when we lived near the coast?" "We never lived near the coast," Raymond said without hesitation. "You know that, we were inland, always." "Did Mom ever talk about Europe, Race-marked, a city with a bay?" Raymond's expression did something small and quick. A flicker, there and gone, that Nadia, trained to read faces for provenance, recognized as recognition. He knew the name. He had not expected her to say it. "Why would your mother talk about Race-marked?" he said. Not where did you hear that, but why would she talk about it? As if the connection between his late wife and the city was a fact he had filed and forgotten she might stumble on. I don't know, Nadia said. I just came across it. He changed the subject to her brother's taxes. Nadia let him. She had what she needed. Her father knew something about race-marked, and he did not want her to know he knew. That night she went through the boxes of her mother's things she had never fully sorted, the ones she had stored in her closet after the funeral, the ones that smelled of citrus and dust, the smell that triggered the street. She found, at the bottom of a cedar chest, a letter. It was in her mother's handwriting, undated, addressed to no one, the kind of letter you write because you have to say it to someone and there is no one. If you ever remember her, don't be afraid. She isn't a ghost. She's a debt we owe, and we paid it the only way we could. You were so small. We thought it was kinder to let you forget. We were probably wrong. We were wrong about a lot of things. M. Remember asterisk her, not remember asterisk it. Her mother had written asterisk her asterisk as if Nadia were supposed to remember a person. As if the memories Nadia was having were not a sickness but a return. Nadia read the letter 3 times. The first time for the words. The second for the tremor she imagined in her mother's hand. The third for the thing the words refused to say plainly, that Edna had known about the her and had chosen silence as a kind of protection, the way she had chosen the yellow walls and the ordinary childhood and the story that Nadia was simply theirs. Edna had carried this knowledge alone for decades, that her daughter's mind held another woman's life, and had told no one, not even Raymond, not even Nadia, because telling would have meant explaining the unexplainable to a child who deserved a normal Tuesday. Nadia understood the logic even as she resented it. Her mother had traded Nadia's right to know for Nadia's right to be ordinary. It was a trade Nadia would not have made, but it was a trade made in love, the only currency Edna had. The investigation took a turn toward the personal, when a stranger recognized a detail Nadia described. She had by now begun speaking about the memories to Theo, carefully, as if they were a research curiosity rather than an invasion of her own mind. Theo, a film studies minor turned archivist, listened with the right mix of skepticism and fascination. I keep seeing this apartment, Nadia said one afternoon, testing him. Warped floorboard by the door, a plant dying in the corner, tall windows. Afternoon light turns the dust gold. Theo frowned. Gold dust, that specific, sounds like a place in a movie. It's not a movie, it's a memory, or it thinks it is. Have you tried describing it to someone who might have been there? Like, an actual person from that city? She had not. She had been treating the memories as internal, hers to solve alone. But Victor had said race-marked had a cafe culture, a close community, people who remembered. On impulse, she posted in a race-marked history forum anonymously as a researcher describing the apartment, the green shutters at 14 Cade, the woman Alois, the man's voice, the bay. The reply came in 2 days from a woman named Merritt, 71, who had grown up in race-marked and now lived in the apartment building that had been the old library. You describe my aunt's apartment, Merritt wrote, number 14 Cade. My aunt Alois lived there. The floorboard by the door creaked, we all complained about it. The plant in the corner always died, she could not keep anything alive, it was a family joke. She took the photograph at the bay in the spring of 1958. She died that summer. We lost the framed print in a flood. How do you know these things? Nadia read the message in the archives break room and had to sit down. Alois had been real. The apartment had been real. The floorboard, the plant, the photograph, all real, confirmed by a living relative who had no idea Nadia existed. The memories were not delusions. They were accurate descriptions of a dead woman's life, transmitted to a woman who had never been to race-marked and had never heard the name Alois until the voice in her head spoke it. She wrote back carefully, I work with archival photographs. I may have handled an image of your aunt. Could we speak? Merritt agreed. They spoke by video call. Merritt was wary but kind, a retired teacher who had spent her life protecting her family's small histories. Nadia told her only that she had encountered Alois's story through a donation. Merritt, in turn, told her what a family protects. That Alois had been engaged to a man named Tomas, that he had died in an accident weeks before the wedding, that Alois had never recovered, that she had taken the bay photograph as a kind of goodbye, and that she had left, in Merritt's words, a box of things with a friend before she died. Tomas was a boat builder, Merritt said, the detail arriving as if she had been waiting to tell someone. He made the little vessels they raced in the bay on festival days. Alois said he smelled of varnish and salt, and that she could find him in any crowd by that smell. When he died, a rigging failure, the water was rough that spring, she stopped coming to the festivals. She stopped coming to most things. My mother said Alois became a photograph of herself, still moving but not really there. That's why the bay picture matters. It was her last time at the water before she decided the water had taken enough from her. A box of things, Nadia repeated. Do you know what was in it? A camera, letters, a journal, I think. Her friend's family kept it. I don't know where it ended up, probably lost in the floods. Merritt paused. Why are you so interested in my aunt? She was nobody, a clerk, a sad ending. Nobody outside Racemarked remembers her. Nadia almost said, because I remember her. I remember her apartment and her perfume and the way the light fell. I remember loving a man whose name I only know as Tomas. I remember her last spring. She did not say it. She thanked Merritt and ended the call and sat in the silence of her own apartment, which suddenly felt like a borrowed room in someone else's life. For a long moment after the call, she simply held the phone. Merritt's voice, practical, kindly, faintly skeptical, lingered in the room like a scent. Nadia had expected suspicion, maybe hostility, from a stranger whose dead aunt was being described by a woman she had never met. Instead, she had found an accomplice. Merritt, it turned out, had spent her own life protecting small family histories no one else valued. They were, Nadia realized, two archivists of the same lost woman, working 60 years apart. The box, Merritt had said, was probably lost in the floods. Nadia did not believe in probably lost. As an archivist, she knew that things survived by being forgotten in the right place, a cellar, an attic, a relative who didn't care. She began to search estate records for Racemarked, specifically for the estate of Alois's friend, a woman named Hannah Brecht. She found it in a surprising place, the Hollies Museum's own accession records. A 1961 donation, logged but never catalogued, from a H. Brecht estate, Racemarked, a box of personal effects that had sat in the museum's off-site storage for 60 years, mislabeled as * General European Ephemera. Nadia requested it. The archivist on duty, seeing a colleague's internal request, approved it without question. Box 61 contained exactly what Merritt had described. A camera, a 1950s folding camera, its leather cracked. A bundle of letters, tied with string. A journal, small, cloth-covered, its pages fragile. And at the bottom, a single photograph. Alois at the bay, a different print from the Pollard one, this one in color, faded to the soft oranges of old film. Nadia opened the journal with the reverence she gave to all such objects, and then with something else, because this journal had been written by the woman whose life was unfolding inside her mind. The journal was not a confession. It was ordinary. Alois wrote about the weather, the cafe, Tomas, the plant that would not live, a neighbor's dog. But woven through the ordinary was a thread Nadia recognized with a shock. Alois described memories that were not hers. I keep seeing a child, Alois wrote in the spring before she died. A little girl with dark hair in a house with yellow walls. I have never had a child, but I see her. She is happy. She is safe. I hope she stays safe. And later, the doctors say it is the grief, the tumor, the medicine. But I know a child when I see one in my mind. She is someone's child. Maybe she is mine in a way they don't have words for. Nadia had read those lines before in her own head 100 times, the yellow walls, the dark-haired child, the sense of safety. She had assumed they were her own earliest memories, the ones everyone has and no one can prove. Now she saw them for what they were. Alois's reception of Nadia, arriving in 1958, the way Nadia's reception of Alois arrived in 2024. The child Alois saw was Nadia's infancy, perceived across the distance, the way you perceive a light through a keyhole, not the whole room, but enough to know someone is home. She understood, reading it, why her own first memories had always felt borrowed. They were. The yellow walls were Alois's glimpse of Nadia's nursery. The sense of safety was Alois's relief that the child was, against all reason, all right. Nadia had been carrying another woman's view of her own beginning her entire life and had mistaken it for the beginning itself. The memories were not one-directional. Alois had remembered Nadia, and Nadia, decades later, was remembering Alois. Somehow, the two lives had touched not in this lifetime, but in a way neither woman had chosen and neither could explain. She did not yet understand the mechanism. She only understood the shape. The remembering went both ways, and it had started when one of them was dying and the other was being born. The letter from her mother, "If you ever remember her, don't be afraid," had used the word debt. Nadia returned to it with the box's contents in mind, and she began to see her mother's life differently. Edna Vance had been a quiet woman who married late, had 2 children, and disappeared slowly into illness. But before Nadia, before the Yellow House, Edna had been someone else. Nadia went looking in the only place her mother might have left a trail, a slender folder of Edna's papers she had skimmed at the funeral and dismissed as receipts. Inside, beneath the receipts, was a certificate Nadia had never seen. It was not a birth certificate. It was an adoption-adjacent document, a lifebook, the kind used in mid-century private placements, a handmade album given to adoptive parents to explain a child's origins without naming them. On its first page, in a caseworker's careful hand, child placed 1988. Biological maternal line traced to a European family with a history of, noted here, unexplained recollective episodes. Recommendation: do not disclose. The word recollective stopped her. It was not a word people used casually in 1988 or now. It meant, she understood with a slow chill, exactly what she was experiencing, and it had been noted in her own placement record before she was a day old. Someone, a caseworker with more curiosity than caution, had known that the biological maternal line carried this trait, and had written it down as a warning no one had heeded. Her adoptive parents had been told, in effect, that their daughter might remember things she hadn't lived, and they had been told not to tell her. So the knowledge had traveled, from a stranger caseworker, to a sealed file, to Edna's frightened silence, to Nadia's own mind, where it had been arriving as sensation her entire life. Nadia sat with the word recollective. It was an old clinical euphemism for what she was experiencing. Her biological maternal line, whoever that was, had a history of it. Whatever it was, it ran in the blood, or the memory, or something her mother had chosen not to explain. She called Raymond, not to accuse but to ask, gently, the question she had avoided: was I adopted? He was quiet for a long time. Then, "Your mother wanted to tell you, I talked her out of it. We thought we were of that generation, Nadia. We thought some things were better left. You were ours. The paper said so. The yellow walls were ours. The childhood was yours." Who was my biological mother? I don't know her name. Your mother, Edna, she found out through a registry before you were born that there was a pattern. Her own mother, her grandmother. Women who remembered things they hadn't lived. She was afraid it would pass to you. She was more afraid it wouldn't, and you'd be alone with it the way she'd watched her own mother be alone with it. Did she know about Alois? Nadia said. The name came out steady. Another silence. She never said that name to me, but in her last year, when the confusion was bad, she'd sometimes say the girl by the water is safe now. I thought it was the illness. Maybe it wasn't. Nadia hung up and understood, finally, the shape of her mother's silence. Edna had known that her daughter carried a lineage of borrowed memory, that somewhere a dead woman's life was pressed into her like a flower in a book. Edna had not known how to protect her from it, so she had protected her from knowing, from the fear, if not from the thing itself. The letter had been an apology written too late, and a hope: if you ever remember her, don't be afraid. Nadia was not afraid. She was furious, briefly, at the withholding, and then tired, and then something like grateful. Her mother had carried this knowledge alone for decades, so Nadia could have an ordinary yellow childhood. It had not worked, but it had been love of the kind her family knew how to give. Silent, late, and true. The pattern: women in her biological maternal line, who remembered things they hadn't lived, demanded an explanation that was not supernatural and not a dream. Nadia, trained in archival research, did what she did best. She read. She found, in medical and psychological literature, a thread she had not known existed. There were documented cases, rare, disputed, often dismissed, of what researchers in the early 20th century had called cryptomnesia hereditaria inherited hidden memory. Instances where a parent, under extreme duress or near death, appeared to transmit vivid sensory impressions to a child, particularly when the child was conceived or born close to the parent's death. The mechanism proposed, and never proven, was not mystical. It was chemical and structural. In the intense neurochemical state of dying, or of a mother in the months before a terminal illness, memory traces could be encoded into the biological material passed to the next generation, the way trauma can alter gene expression that is then inherited. The child would not remember intellectually. They would remember a sensation, a smell, a street, a voice, exactly as Nadia did. The literature was thin and contested. Mainstream science rejected it, the papers were old, the samples small, the language suspiciously eager. But Nadia was not looking for mainstream science. She was looking for a shape that fit. And this shape fit: her biological maternal line, a woman dying, a child born into the memory of her death and the life that preceded it. Eloise, dying of her tumor in the spring of 1958, her mind saturated with her own last days, and the apartment and Tomas and the bay, and somewhere, a child conceived or born into that lineage, receiving Eloise's final sensory world as if it were her own infancy. She found one case that read like a mirror. A 1923 paper by a Viennese clinician described a girl who, from early childhood, recalled the deathbed of a maternal great-aunt she had never met, the smell of the woman's medicine, the pattern of light on her wall, a lullaby in a language the girl's family did not speak. The clinician attributed it to a living relative's repeated storytelling. But the girl had insisted, the paper noted with clinical impatience, that no one had told her. She simply knew. Nadia read that line twice. She simply knew. It was the most honest sentence in the literature, and the only one that matched her experience. But Eloise could not be Nadia's direct biological mother. Eloise had died childless in 1958, decades before Nadia was born in 1988. The lineage was longer, stranger. Eloise was an ancestor, not Nadia's mother, but her great-aunt, perhaps, or a more distant woman in the maternal line, whose death memory had propagated down through the generations, strengthened or weakened at each birth, until it reached Nadia, the first in generations to be born close enough to a dying woman's transmission to receive it fully. Nadia tested this against what she knew. The memories were of Eloise's life and death, not of Nadia's mother's life. If the transmission were from mother to daughter, Nadia would remember Edna. She remembered almost nothing of Edna's inner life, only her own childhood with her. The memories skipped generations, landing on the woman whose death was closest in the chain. Eloise, the original dying woman, the source. It was, she admitted, extraordinary, but it was not impossible. It was a hypothesis with a mechanism, chemical, hereditary, tragically ordinary in its means. The dying encode, the born receive. Memory, it turned out, might be more than personal. It might be, in some families, a kind of inheritance no one had asked for. The twist arrived not as a revelation, but as a contradiction she could no longer ignore. She had built a clean theory. Eloise, dying in 1958, transmitted her final sensory world hereditarily down the maternal line to Nadia. It explained the memories, the triggers, the accuracy, the two-way hint in Eloise's journal. Eloise, near death, had briefly seen the unborn descendant. It was plausible, original, and Nadia felt sure, close to the truth. But two facts did not fit, and Nadia, who cataloged contradictions for a living, could not file them away. First, the timeline. Eloise died in the summer of 1958. For the maternal line transmission to reach Nadia in 1988, it had to pass through at least two, possibly three women in between daughters who received the memory weekly and passed it on. Yet Nadia's memories of Eloise were vivid, not faint. Hereditary traits weaken with distance, they do not sharpen. A memory passed through three women should arrive as a whisper. Nadia's arrived as a shout. Something had amplified it, or the chain was shorter than the math allowed. She pulled the maternal line records again, the ones from the museum's off-site storage, the lifebook, her mother's certificate. Eloise's sister Hannah had a daughter in 1961. That daughter had a daughter in 1970. That daughter, Nadia's biological mother, had Nadia in 1988. 3 generations between Eloise and Nadia. By every rule of inheritance, the signal should have faded to nothing by Nadia. Instead, it had arrived louder than ever. The contradiction was not a loose thread, it was the knot. Second, and worse, Eloise's journal entry about the dark-haired child in the yellow house was dated March 1958, months before Eloise's death. Eloise had been seeing the child while still alive and not yet dying, which meant the transmission, if that's what it was, had flowed from Alois to the future child, while Alois was merely ill, not dying, and more disturbingly, the journal implied Alois had seen the child before the child could have been born into the lineage. The direction of time in Nadia's theory was backward somewhere, and she could not find the error. She reread the journal, and there, in an entry she had skimmed, Alois wrote something that rearranged everything. The doctor says the medicine shows me things. He says it is the tumor pressing or the drugs, but I think it is her. The child, she is not born yet and already she is in my mind. We are connected the wrong way around. I am dying into her. I am dying into her. Not Alois transmitting to a descendant. Alois, in her illness, * receiving from a child who would come later, and the child, in turn, receiving Alois. The connection was not a one-way hereditary pipeline. It was a loop. Alois's dying mind, altered by tumor and medicine, had reached across time to the only mind in the lineage that could answer, and that mind was Nadia's, receiving Alois even as Alois received the shape of Nadia's yet unborn life. Which meant Nadia was not a passive recipient of an ancestor's death. She was half of a connection that had opened at both ends. Alois had not given her a life. They had, in some impossible correspondence of two dying and being born minds, shared one. The twist recontextualized everything Nadia had believed about her own past. The false memories were not intrusions. They were a correspondence, a letter written in both directions between a woman dying in 1958 and a girl being born 30 years later, conducted in the only language available to both: sensation. The street, the perfume, the song, the apartment, the bay, Alois's final world, arriving in Nadia's mind as if remembered, because to Alois they had been her present, and to Nadia they were the other half of a conversation she had been having since before she had words. And the moments Nadia had always thought were * her earliest memories, the yellow walls, a sense of safety, a woman's voice humming, those were not hers either, or not only. They were Alois's reception of Nadia's infancy, reflected back. Her childhood had always contained a guest. She had simply not known the guest had a name. This explained the two-way journal entry. Alois, near death, had briefly perceived the future child, Nadia's infancy, the way Nadia in life perceived Alois's past. The connection was symmetric. Time, for the two of them, had folded. It also explained why Nadia's memories of Alois were so vivid despite the generational distance. The connection did not run * through the intervening women as a weakening signal. It ran * around * them, directly, because the only two minds in the lineage capable of holding it were Alois's, at the source, and Nadia's, at the receiving end. The women between had carried the potential silently, like a gene that skips a generation and returns. Nadia thought of her own mother then, Edna, who had known and said nothing, and let Nadia have an ordinary yellow childhood instead of this. The silence had not been a denial of the truth. It had been a kind of shelter. Nadia had spent months resenting it. Now she understood it as love wearing the only shape her family knew. And it explained her mother's letter. Edna had known not the mechanism, but the fact that her daughter carried a recollective lineage that a dead woman's life pressed against Nadia's. Edna had called it a * debt. Nadia understood the word now. Alois had given her dying world to a stranger child in the future, and Nadia, by remembering her, was the only repayment possible. Don't be afraid, Edna had written. She isn't a ghost. She's a debt we owe. The letter had been, Nadia saw now, not a warning but a welcome. Edna had known the remembering would come, had perhaps even hoped for it, that her daughter might, through this strange inheritance, know a woman Edna herself had never met but had quietly honored by keeping the secret. The debt was not a burden. It was a bridge. And Nadia, standing at the far end of it, had finally walked across. The mystery was, at its core, not a mystery of identity but of inheritance, the kind will records. Nadia had not lived Alois's life. She had * received * it, the way you receive a letter addressed to someone else and realize, reading it, that it was always meant for you. The full twist landed when Nadia compared the dates and found the one thing that made the loop inevitable. Alois died in the summer of 1958. Nadia was born in 1988, 30 years apart, but the maternal line records Nadia had uncovered showed that Alois's * sister Hannah, the same Hannah Brecht whose box Nadia now held, had a daughter in 1961, and that daughter had a daughter in 1970, and that daughter, Nadia's biological mother, had Nadia in 1988. Alois was not a distant ancestor. She was Nadia's great-aunt and the box Nadia had requested from storage had been Alois's, passed to Hannah, then down the line, until it reached the museum and then Nadia's own hands. The box was not a coincidence. It was the object the connection had been anchored to. Alois, knowing in the strange clarity of her illness that her mind was reaching forward, had left a box of her life with her sister, trusting that it would travel down the line to the child she kept seeing. The journal, the camera, the letters, the photograph, these were not random artifacts. They were a message addressed to a specific recipient. The great-niece born 30 years after Alois's death, the only mind in the family wired to receive her. And the loop closed. Alois had seen Nadia's infancy in 1958 because Nadia, decades later, would open this very box and remember Alois in return. The connection required the box to complete itself. Alois had engineered her own transmission by leaving the proof of her life where her descendant would find it. The donation to the museum in 1961, made by Hannah, had been the final instruction in a letter Nadia found at the bottom of the box. "Give this to the museum when I am gone. She will come for it. She always does in the end." Nadia had come for it. She had always been coming for it. The memories were Alois reaching. The box was Alois's hand on the latch. She unfolded the letter from Hannah, dated weeks after Alois's death. "My sister made me promise," Hannah had written. "She said a girl would come, years from now, who already knows our street and our bay, and that I must not be afraid of her and that I must give her the box. I thought she was delirious. But Alois was never wrong about the things that mattered. So I am keeping the box, and I am keeping this promise, for a stranger who is also my niece, whoever and whenever she is." Hannah had kept it for 60 years, through a flood and a move and her own death, because her sister had asked. The box had survived everything except Nadia's own hesitation. And Nadia, reading the promise written by a woman she had never met, felt the last of her doubt fall away. She had not been haunted. She had been expected. The twist was not that Nadia was Alois, or that she had been adopted by her, or that she had dreamed the whole thing. The twist was that a dying woman, in the only way her love could find, had mailed her life forward through her family to a great niece she would never meet, and that the mailing had arrived, intact, 63 years later, in the mind of the one person built to receive it. What stayed unexplained, Nadia noted it, and let it stand, was a single memory that did not fit the loop. In one of her earliest, remembered moments of Alois's last days, Alois had whispered a name that was not Tomas, not anyone in the family records. A name Nadia had, as a child, given to an imaginary friend. Marlowe. Alois, in a memory Nadia could not have sourced from the box or the journal, had called the child Marlowe. The exact private name Nadia had invented at age 4 for a friend no one else could see. Nadia had told no one that name. Not her mother, not a therapist, not Theo, yet Alois knew it. The loop explained the memories. It did not explain how a woman dying in 1958 had known the secret name of a child 30 years future, a name that child had never spoken aloud. Nadia left that one in the box, unopened, the way you leave a door open on purpose. Knowing the truth did not make Nadia's life simpler. It made it stranger, and she had to decide what to do with a stranger life. She could pursue the mystery further, find the living descendants of Hannah, confirm the lineage, perhaps meet the cousins who carried the potential silently. She could publish, or try to, the cryptomnesia hereditaria hypothesis, attach Alois's journal as evidence, and risk being dismissed by a science that did not believe her. She could tell her father, her brother, her co-workers, or tell no one, and carry Alois alone, the way her mother had carried the knowledge alone. She chose, characteristically, to do the quiet thing thoroughly. She cataloged the box properly, the camera, the letters, the journal, the photograph, and donated it to the Hollies Museum as a formal accession, with Alois named at last, not as *unknown sitter but as Alois Brecht, 1930–1958, race-marked, remembered at last by the great-niece who had been receiving her all along. She wrote the provenance note herself. It was the first time she had logged a feeling and called it fact. The note read in her careful archivist's hand, Alois Brecht, 1930–1958, race-marked, Clerk, amateur photographer, keeper of a small and ordinary life that ended early. Contents donated by her sister Hannah Brecht, 1961, to the Hollies Museum, where they waited 62 years for the right reader. Identified and catalogued by her great-niece, N. Vance, 2024. The record is now complete. The person is now named. Rest in catalogued peace, Eloise. She read the note back and allowed herself a small, private satisfaction. It was the kind of sentence her profession existed to write, the sentence that turns a stranger into a name. She had written thousands of them. This was the first one she had written for family. She called Merritt and told her the truth, gently, that she was Eloise's great-niece, that she had found the box, that Eloise was not nobody. She was the root of a family that had carried her forward without knowing it. Merritt wept, and then laughed, and said Eloise would have liked that a relative had turned out to be an archivist, because Eloise had been hopeless with papers and someone had to set her straight. And Nadia made the choice the story had been building toward without her noticing. She stopped treating the memories as intrusions to be explained away and started treating them as a relationship. She set aside one evening a week. She called it Eloise's hour, to remember deliberately, to play the piano melody she had never learned, to imagine the bay at the Green Dome, to let the voice say, Eloise, come look at the light without flinching. She was not Eloise. She was Nadia, archivist, 36, allergic to perfume, bad at asking for help. But she was also, now, the keeper of a dead woman's last spring. That was a kind of self she had not been before, and she found she did not mind it. She told Theo, finally, the whole of it not as a curiosity, but as a confession of who she was becoming. He listened, then said the most Theo thing. So you're telling me your dead great-aunt's mixtape has been playing in your head your whole life, and you only just found the liner notes? Nadia laughed, which was the point. After he left, she sat with the laughter still warm in her chest and thought about how strange it was that the person she had become closest to in this whole affair was a dead woman she had never met, and a coworker who made jokes about mixtapes. The two connections bracketed her life now, the inherited and the chosen. Eloise had been given to her, Theo she had let in. Nadia, who had spent years trusting objects over people, was learning, late but learning, that some of the most reliable archives were the ones other people kept of you. The last memory came not as an intrusion, but as a gift, the week she finished cataloging the box. She was at home, the yellow walls long painted over, the apartment quiet. She touched the old folding camera from Eloise's box, the worn leather, the creak of the bellows, and the trigger fired exactly as her rules predicted. A texture, a sound, a memory. This time the memory was not of the apartment or the bay. It was of Eloise in her last days, sitting at the same window with the warped floorboard, writing in the journal by the gold afternoon light, and thinking not about death, not about Tomas, but about a child she would never hold. And Eloise's thought, arriving in Nadia's mind with the clarity of a voice, was not asterisk goodbye. It was asterisk thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for being the one who turned the page. Nadia understood then that the connection had never been a haunting. It had been a handoff. Eloise, dying, had needed someone to carry her forward, and the only mind in the lineage that could was a great niece not yet born. So she had reached, and Nadia had received, and the box had been the latch, and the thank you had been waiting at the end of the line the whole time, like a letter that says arrived safely written before the journey began. She closed the journal and put it, with the camera and the letters, into the museum's accession envelope. She kept only the color photograph, Eloise at the bay, the last spring, and pinned it above her desk, where the sticky note about the green shutters had once been. The note she threw away. For years, that yellow square had been a confession of confusion. Now it was simply unnecessary. The confusion had a name, and the name was Eloise, and the sticky note had done its quiet work of marking the place where the question began. Outside, the city she had never visited kept its gray sky and its green dome and its cafe that no longer served almond cake. And inside Nadia, the loop settled, not closed but at rest, the way a borrowed book rests on the shelf once it has been read and returned to the person who lent it. She had been afraid at the start that the memories weren't hers, that she was haunted or broken or becoming someone else. She had learned the truer thing, they weren't hers, and that was the gift. She was not Eloise. She was the person Eloise had trusted with the ending. Identity, it turned out, was not only what you remembered. It was what you chose to carry for someone who could no longer carry it themselves. Nadia kept Alois's hour, and she kept the photograph, and she kept the door open. She visited Raymond and told him simply that she had found her biological family and that they were kind and dead and hers. He nodded, the way he nodded at things he had always known. "Your mother would have liked that you went looking," he said. "She was afraid you'd go looking and find nothing. She didn't understand that you'd find something better than nothing. You'd find her, the other one, the one in the water." "Alois," Nadia said. "Alois," he repeated, as if tasting a name he had been asked to forget and was relieved to say. In the archive, Nadia did her work better than before, because she understood now that every box of donated lives was a letter to the future, and that somewhere a descendant might be listening. She treated the photographs with more gentleness. She hummed the French melody at her desk and did not apologize for it. And late at night, when the building was empty and the only sound was the hum of the climate control, she would sometimes feel the citrusan dust smell rise, and the street with the green shutters, and the voice. And she would answer it, inwardly, the way you answer a caller you have been expecting for a very long time. "I'm here," she would think. "I remembered, it's okay. You can rest now." The memories did not stop. She did not want them to. They were not hers, and they were hers, the way an inheritance is not yours until you accept it, and then suddenly, irreducibly, is. One evening, going through a new donation, she found a second photograph tucked behind a letter. A snapshot she did not recognize, of a child she did not know, in a house with yellow walls, holding a toy camera, smiling at someone just out of frame. On the back, in Alois's fading ink, Marlowe. She finally told me her name. Nadia had never told Alois that name. She had never written it, never spoken it, never logged it. Marlowe was the private name of the imaginary friend she had invented at 4 and forgotten by 6, the name that had appeared, unexplained, in the memory Alois whispered in Nadia's earliest, remembered moment of her last days. She turned the photograph over and over in her hands. The child in it was not her. The house was not hers. The toy camera was not hers. But the name Marlowe was hers, and always had been, and Alois had known it before Nadia had ever said it, and there was no box, no journal, no loop of dying and being born minds that explained how a woman who died in 1958 had learned the secret name of a child 30 years future, a name that child had never spoken aloud. She thought back to age 4, to the friend she had invented, Marlowe, who had lived in the closet and eaten imaginary crackers and listened when no one else did. Her parents had smiled at the game and quietly worried. Nadia had outgrown Marlowe the way children outgrow the honest parts of themselves, and had filed the name in the place where forgotten things go. That Alois had known it, had spoken it in a memory Nadia could not have sourced from any artifact, meant the connection between them had been deeper than the box, deeper than the loop, deeper than any mechanism Nadia had been able to name. It meant that somewhere in the correspondence of their two minds, Alois had touched not just Nadia's infancy, but Nadia's interior, the private room where a child keeps her truest names. That was the part no theory reached. That was the door Nadia had chosen to leave open from the very start. Nadia placed the photograph in the envelope with the rest of Alois's things. She did not analyze it. She did not add it to her theory. She simply let it sit, a small, disturbing fact with no drawer to file it in, the one detail the rational explanation could not reach, the one door she had chosen, from the start, to leave open. Outside, the city she had never visited kept its gray sky. Inside, the loop rested. And Nadia Vance, archivist of other people's lives, keeper of a dead woman's last spring, went on with her own life, which was, she had finally learned, composed of more than she could remember, and more than she could explain, and exactly enough to be hers. Those memories aren't mine. She had been right, they weren't. And that was the most freeing thing she had ever known. End.